Welcome back. You're watching The Fix with me, Karima Brown. I'm, of course, discussing the proposal around an amnesty for those linked to state capture and corruption. Professor Chipkin, if I read Professor Madonsela correctly, she is suggesting that we change the Constitution and make provision for a legal framework that will allow people to come forward and essentially walk away without being prosecuted. Is that the right reason to change the Constitution in your mind?
Karima, I didn't hear her say that, so I have to be honest. I heard a distinction, which I think is a very important distinction, and one which I think we've lost sight of in South Africa, between corruption and grand corruption. An attempt to understand state capture as something specific and different to just generalized corruption. And I've actually, in this very studio, I've heard Professor Madonsela make a point about the current Zondo Commission, that its focus on generalized corruption is losing sight of state capture per se, and I tend to agree with that. So state capture is something specific, and I think the personalities employed or involved in state capture are usually high political office bearers, and I think perhaps a different dispensation is required for them because they are very, very difficult to get to. Former presidents, cabinet ministers.
But we don't have that in our current constitution, so it would require that, wouldn't it?
Well, unless they can't be reached by the criminal justice system, but perhaps it can be if we get those institutions working. But I think the point generally is that our focus on corruption is that we're losing sight of a much bigger phenomenon, and that is really that what state capture was, and what we argued, and I hold that, and I think that argument was largely correct, was essentially emergence of a networks of people who were prepared to bypass existing legal democratic processes, take decisions which are of great democratic importance, economic importance, in and through a whole range of forums and a whole range of processes without accountability and without legal standing. That essentially is state capture. It's not just about looting and thievery from the public fiscus or from state institutions.
Okay, I mean, I recognize that is not just an academic distinction. Professor Calland, state capture was described as akin to a coup because it wasn't, as Professor Chipkin was saying, about looting. It was literally about capturing the process of policy making. In the case of the SABC, for example, surrendering that to big capital and big multinational interests, getting people to rewrite the rules and the laws. If you look at a place like SARS and the involvement of a consultancy like Bain. But the idea then of amnesty for those people involved in state capture, doesn't it become more egregious, considering that this is not just corruption, that this is in fact the replacement, or it was a project to replace the democratic institutions of the country and replace it with a set of amorphous structures that was set up for the sole purpose of benefiting former President Jacob Zuma, his family and his friends?
Thanks, Karima. You pretty much answered your own question there, if I may say so, in that, yes, where a network forms with the very specific, strategic, however clumsily executed intent of taking over the democratic state, then clearly that is of a higher order than kind of smaller, even if they are valuable acts of corruption. I say valuable in the sense of the scale of the theft. This was a wholesale takeover, but we must be careful not to suggest that this had an ideological purpose or it was political or revolutionary. Of course, it used some of that language to dress up and mask what was really going on, but it was looting. It was looting of a particular kind, if I can use that expression. My view is absolutely clear. The Zondo Commission is the body that has been charged with finding out what happened and why, and to recommending how to prevent it from happening again. That is the accountability mechanism that South Africa has chosen to take care of this problem. We must give the Zondo Commission time to finish its work. I think it's been doing excellent work. It's moved quite slowly, but then again, it's been very thorough. Of course, what will matter is the quality of its final report and the extent to which that report lands. And it will be the job of the media and people like myself and others and Professor Madonsela to make sure that that report is taken seriously and is acted upon.
Okay, Professor Madonsela, you have said the Zondo Commission of Inquiry is doing an excellent job. Prior to the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, we had the South African Council of Churches had what was called an unburdening process that happened in secret, where state officials, no matter what their rank in the civil service, could come and speak freely. The Zondo Commission of Inquiry is also a place, Professor Chipkin says, a safe space where people can come. What do you think in the Zondo Commission of Inquiry isn't happening that takes you from there to proposing amnesty as a way out to get people to come forward?
Thank you, Karima. Again, I acknowledge people's concerns and I agree with Prof. Chipkin that state capture is a treasonous kind of act that really hijacks the state for the interests of a few. And to do this, they need powerful people within the state, or they place powerful people within the state. You can buy yourself a president, as in the Manchurian Candidate movie, and thereafter you use that president to capture everything else that matters to you. I'm not suggesting that the Commission is not doing enough, Karima. I'm not suggesting that the criminal justice system is not doing enough. I'm just looking at black spots or islands, so to speak, of crime that need to be knitted back into the system. And I think Professor Calland is correct in saying perhaps the timing of the conversation is not right, that we should let the Commission conclude whatever it is doing. And of course, for me, as a trained investigator on corruption, including organized crime such as state capture, I know what it takes for that crime to be concluded. Just based on the interviews, there are missing links.
What are those missing links, and how will the process that you're suggesting get us to those missing links? Let's, for example, just start with the security cluster, because that is, in my view, the biggest gap that we have at the moment. And most importantly, that group of people are currently the custodians of the criminal justice system. They themselves stand accused. So how does amnesty get us out of that bind?
Absolutely. Karima, you've hit the nail on its head, that we haven't had much people self-disclosing. How does this get us out of that bind is that it creates more safer space, and my colleagues are suggesting there is safe space. No, there isn't enough safe space, because the safe space in this particular dispensation, truth, justice and reconciliation dispensation, means you self-disclose without the normal consequences of committing a crime. It's similar to plea bargaining, but in this particular case, we haven't caught you, you're not in the system, you're the ones who know you did it. We will catch you eventually. I mean, crime eventually is discovered and people eventually pay for their crimes. What we're trying to do is to expedite the process. And I'm not particularly looking at politicians, though. My own suggestion was about the normal public functionaries that are in the system. The people who were talking about, Karima, in the criminal justice system, there would have been prosecutors. The people who came, for example, for me, from the Hawks, it was weird that very senior people would start investigating you for perjury when you just gave a different interpretation of the law. And obviously some of these are lawyers and they know the meaning of perjury. They would know where these instructions came from. Somebody knows where these instructions were coming from. The instructions not to arrest. Freddie Derry, the instructions not to act.
Okay, Professor Madonsela, hold that thought. Let's run with what she's saying, Ivor, in terms of state capture and the criminal justice system in particular. So, for example, we have a situation where certain cases have just disappeared. Let's take the Richard Mluli case. NGOs such as Freedom Under Law had to litigate to bring that matter to fruition. We still don't have an explanation for why one prosecutor decided there's no case and another not only took the matter to court, there was a successful prosecution. We now have Richard Mluli serving a sentence of 5 years. How does what Professor Madonsela is proposing answer the question of why that prosecutor thought there was no case and that case just went away until litigation had to happen. Does it actually?
Well, I can't answer that particular question, but it does raise some broader questions around this idea that what state capture was essentially looting. And I think we have to think about this notion of looting, what the notion of looting means other than a sense of thievery, what is motivating it. Because what is underestimated in that regard is precisely that there's a politics there. So your choice to prosecute one person as opposed to another person, I doubt there may well have been money exchanged. You may well find that the person made that decision on the basis of financial interest. My suspicion is that that's probably not the case. My suspicion is that often those decisions are made on the basis of political games being played within the NPA, and that largely a whole lot of political considerations were affecting who was prosecuted and who was not prosecuted. So Thuli not being prosecuted, I doubt, is because somehow he was paying people. He may well have been, he had access to slush funds, but it's almost certain on the basis that he was believed to be part of an alliance who was serving an important interest, and therefore he had people backing him. And this is what worries me around the way we go with the notion of state capture simply as corruption, or we stop short of the notion of simply of looting, is that we fail to consider motives. And I think there's a lot more going on in state capture than simply greed or self-enrichment. I think there genuinely was serious politics going on here. We've used the notion of a silent coup. We've talked about an assault on democracy. And I think that's what's been lost in the current conversation, is essentially what happened over the last 10, 12 years was a fundamental assault on the constitutional and democratic fabric of South Africa in the name of a politics of redistribution.
Okay, so on that note, of course, we are going to look at how the value chain worked, because so far we've nabbed some of the politicians. They've certainly been exposed in the media, but the rest of the value chain, such as the police, such as crime intelligence, such as the NPA, is still not exposed. Don't go anywhere. We'll continue with this conversation after the break.